would you like a brand new home by 2027? You and VMBS can make it happen with iSave. Every $25,000 you save with iSave earns an entry to win cash or a new home of your own, all while seeing your balance grow and grow. The more you save, the more entries you get, and every entry has a chance to win a brand new home of your own. Keep saving monthly. Every deposit brings you closer to the grand prize home. VM iSave is the key to winning. How would you like a brand new home by 2027? You and VMBS can make it happen with iSave. Every $25,000 you save with iSave earns an entry to win cash or a new home of your own, all while seeing your balance grow and grow. The more you save, the more entries you get, and every entry has a chance to win a brand new home of your own. Keep saving monthly. Every deposit brings you closer to the grand prize home. VM iSave is the key to winning. How would you like a brand new home by 2027? You and VMBS can make it happen with iSave. Every $25,000 you save with iSave earns an entry to win cash or a new home of your own, all while seeing your balance grow and grow. The more you save, the more entries you get, and every entry has a chance to win a brand new home of your own. Keep saving monthly. Every deposit brings you closer to the grand prize home. VM iSave is the key to winning. How would you like a brand new home by 2027? You and VMBS can make it happen with iSave. Every $25,000 you save with iSave earns an entry to win cash or a new home of your own, all while seeing your balance grow and grow. The more you save, the more entries you get, and every entry has a chance to win a brand new home of your own. Keep saving monthly. Every deposit brings you closer to the grand prize home. VM iSave is the key to winning. How would you like a brand new home by 2027? You and VMBS can make it happen with iSave. Every $25,000 you save with iSave earns an entry to win cash or a new home of your own, all while seeing your balance grow and grow. The more you save, the more entries you get, and every entry has a chance to win a brand new home of your own. Keep saving monthly. Every deposit brings you closer to the grand prize home. VM iSave is the key to winning. How would you like a brand new home by 2027? You and VMBS can make it happen with iSave. Every $25,000 you save with iSave earns an entry to win cash or a new home of your own, all while seeing your balance grow and grow. The more you save, the more entries you get, and every entry has a chance to win a brand new home of your own. Keep saving monthly. Every deposit brings you closer to the grand prize home. VM iSave is the key to winning. How would you like a brand new home by 2027? You and VMBS can make it happen with iSave. Every $25,000 you save with iSave earns an entry to win cash or a new home of your own, all while seeing your balance grow and grow. The more you save, the more entries you get, and every entry has a chance to win a brand new home of your own. Keep saving monthly. Every deposit brings you closer to the grand prize home. VM iSave is the key to winning. How would you like a brand new home by 2027? You and VMBS can make it happen with iSave. Every $25,000 you save with iSave earns an entry to win cash or a new home of your own, all while seeing your balance grow and grow. The more you save, the more entries you get, and every entry has a chance to win a brand new home of your own. Keep saving monthly. Every deposit brings you closer to the grand prize home. VM iSave is the key to winning.
A pleasant good afternoon to you. Oh, we have now gone into evening. Pleasant good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen. Before we get into the formalities, I just have two bits of housekeeping to share with you. The exits to the building are exactly where you came through, that door on that side, and the washrooms are to my left, your right. Thank you so very much. The post-Melissa climate, why the conversation must change. A powerful tropical category 5, some say 5+, some say 6, made landfall in Jamaica with winds of up to 185 miles per hour. This tropical cyclone became the 3rd most intense hurricane on record, as well as the most intense at landfall in the Atlantic Basin. The strongest tropical cyclone recorded worldwide in 2025, the strongest hurricane to hit the island, surpassing Gilbert in 1988. Our National Emergency Operations Center at this time is indicating that they have confirmed 45 persons dead, another 13 missing, 626,352 persons displaced. Households, 90,000 households displaced. Buildings damaged, 215,000. We would have all heard the news by now. Between our government and international partners, they have reckoned the damage to Jamaica, that's our physical damage, to be some 8.8 billion US dollars, representing 41% of our GDP. Ladies and gentlemen, where did we go wrong? Why did this happen to us? Registrar, forgive me, and especially when God is a Jamaican. How did it happen? Your Excellency, the Most Honorable Professor Sir Kenneth Hall, Professor Denzel Williams, PVC, and Principal of UWI Mona, Mr. Courtney Campbell, Group President and CEO of the VM Group. To my left, we have Ms. Claire Bernard, the Deputy Director General of the Planning Institute of Jamaica, Carl Archer, Professor of Urban and Regional Planning at the University of Technology, Jamaica, Professor Donovan Campbell, Professor of Geography and the Director of our Western Jamaica campus, Professor Michael Taylor, Professor of Climate Science and the Dean of the Faculty of Science and Technology, Deputy Principal, the coordinator of this all. Distinguished members of the Victoria Mutual Group, distinguished members of the executive and senior management team of the UWI Mona, our private sector partners, public sector partners, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to you all. Good afternoon to you all. It's evening. Remember I said it was evening and you've gone back there again? Good evening to you all. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you this evening to a gathering like no other. This evening we will examine a phenomenon which we all wish did not happen. But our guest speaker and the panelists here beside me, they've all been talking about it. Did we listen? Did we act? So, the UWI Mona and the Victoria Mutual Group presents the UWI Mona VM Group Distinguished Lecture Series. This is an established grouping, an established activity which is meant for knowledge sharing, supporting the Victoria Mutual Group, a global financial institution with offices in Jamaica and the wider Caribbean. The VM UWI Distinguished Series Lecture remains a strategic partnership between the University of the West Indies Mona, designed to foster thought leadership, knowledge sharing, and scholarly engagement. The initiative showcases UWI's intellectual contributions to national, regional, and global development, while strengthening its competitiveness and promoting actionable dialogue across academia, the private sector, and the wider community. During these proceedings, a foremost world-renowned scientist will exhale and share with us his thoughts. His colleagues in urban planning, geography, and strategic national planning will add their voices from their specialized perspective. It is sincerely hoped that when we leave here, we would leave enriched and we would have a call to action. Ladies and gentlemen, please permit me at this time to invite the Pro-Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of the West Indies Mona campus, Professor Denzel A. Williams, to bring greetings. Sir.
Thank you very much, our very distinguished Master of Ceremonies, Major Clive Davis. Now, I thought about it and said, when you're looking at climate issues, you're going to come and see a guy in a hard hat, some big boots and stuff, but the man is so sharply dressed. I thought I was somewhere else. Well, I found out that I'm actually at the distinguished lecture this evening to talk about climate. Ladies and gentlemen, one and all, it's really good to be here. I will stand on the protocols that the Master of Ceremonies have actually laid out, but it would be remiss of me not to recognize a few persons as well. Let me recognize our very distinguished former Governor General and former Principal of the Mona campus, Professor Sir Kenneth Hall. Welcome, sir. Thank you very much. Let me also recognize our very generous sponsor, Mr. Courtney Campbell, or Dr. Courtney Campbell, and the members from the VM team as well. We thank you very much for your generosity. I'd also like to recognize our speaker for this evening, none other than the very illustrious Michael Taylor, Professor of Climate Studies. And Michael, thank you very much for the work that you're doing in this area. You represented us very, very well, and we're all proud as Jamaicans to have seen you on BBC and all over the world talking about something very, very important to us. So you know that UWI has gravitas. Thank you very much, sir. Okay, I would also like to recognize our Deputy Principal, our Registrar, members of the Senior Management Team here at the Mona campus, and other distinguished ladies and gentlemen, and the members from the media as well. I would also like to recognize our dear friend from Scotiabank, Mrs. Tugwell Henry. The next series is yours. Yes, so put you on notice. Let me also recognize Special Advisor to the Vice Chancellor, Ms. Mina Israel. Mina, welcome and thank you very much for being here. So colleagues all, let me say how pleased I am to be here to share in this very important moment. Now, interestingly, I looked at the topic and it says, let me read it, the post-Melissa climate, why the conversation must change. And it intrigued me that I'm about to hear something new and different. Because if you say it must change to something. And therefore, we're looking forward to why this thing has to change. But in my own view, it's not just about change. It's really also about understanding what happened. And at this point, I still think we're all very unclear. Those of you who have had a chance to look at the landscape of Jamaica and to go into the belly of what has happened to the southwest part of Jamaica, I think, Professor Hall, we're still unclear about exactly what really happened. When you go and you look in Black River or Catadupa or Westmoreland, and you see a parent sitting on a veranda with a child and there is no roof over their head and it starts to rain, then you said, hold on, what really happened? When you are down there and it reaches 5 p.m. and it gets dark and they don't have any hope and nowhere to go, then you say, what has really happened? And these are some realities that a lot of us really have to get into it to see what it means. And therefore, I say this to say that The empirical evidence out there is very clear, Professor Taylor, as to why the conversation really needs to change. But what is going to change to is something that we need to better understand. And we are not going to understand it from merely an emotional point of view, but we're going to understand it from serious, rigorous scholarship that is going to lead and drive this for us. And so that is why I am very pleased and proud of our university taking the forefront as part of the recovery by establishing our higher education task force, which is comprised of a multidisciplinary nature of persons, whether it be from the business sector, whether it be from the psychosocial area, whether it be from climate studies, geography, geology. And what we have done, we have assembled a team of experts. And what they are going to do for us is to provide us with deep insights into why things happened the way they happened and how we need to do things differently in order to be more resilient going forward. I think that deserves commendation from our higher education sector, because this is indeed the direction that I think stronger recovery will take place, because we can't go back to where we were. We run the risk of people saying, because of the urgency of now, let's just get the roofs on, let's just clean up the yard and start over again. And you're going to start over, but you're starting from exactly where you left off. And what we are seeing is that you can't go back to where you were. You have to come with something different. But make no mistakes about it. It's not going to be a kind of a short-term, immediate thing. Because when you look at all that has happened, for a country to lose 41% of its GDP, that is not something you scoff at. It is real, and the bankers are here and they will tell you they're feeling it now. And it don't come yet. Wait until December, when you can't pay the credit card and delinquency ratio has gone high and all these things are happening. You better recalibrate. So it is real, it's going to take time, and all of us will have to be a part of the solution. So today's lecture, I think, will give us food for thought. It will give us some important ideas as to how we're going to recalibrate and recover stronger. And I'm sure that you would all agree that we have no better person than Michael Taylor to give us that insight, and a very distinguished panel of persons who will also provide immediate response to the discussion after Michael Taylor. So ladies and gentlemen, we're in for a treat this evening. Again, I'm very proud and pleased to have been associated with the VM group, and thank you very much for the generosity for us to have this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Principal. And might I just add that a number of our members of that higher education task force are right here with us. Eleanor Jones, could you just wave your hand over there? Good. And then a number of the panelists, Professor Michael Taylor, Professor Carl Archer, and Professor Campbell. They're all members of the task force. We hope to do good things. Dr. Courtney Campbell, may I call you to the podium, sir? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Major Davis. Good evening, everyone. And want to recognize, as the previous speakers did, former Governor General Sir Kenneth Hall, Principal Professor Denzel Williams, Deputy Principal Dr. Tomlin Paul, Professor Michael Taylor, all the panelists. We're looking forward to hearing from you. Professor Archer, Professor Campbell, namesake, and Miss Bernard. So it really is a privilege to welcome you all to this special edition of the UWI Mona VM Group Distinguished Lecture Series. I want to say that it is clear that we can be proud of our university. I say our university, right? Because the University of the West Indies has been demonstrating strong leadership in this post-Melissa era. It is characteristic of what we have known of the UWI over the 75 years or more. But you've heard about the Higher Education Task Force for Disaster Resilience. We know that UWI, along with the UTech and NCU and CMU have all come together to help us to be much better prepared for this new reality that we're living in. But there are several other fora in which the UWI has been raising consciousness, and I know that recently the Department of Economics hosted a public forum on resilience, labor productivity, and fiscal stability after Hurricane Melissa. I'm sure that's not the only such discussion. So tonight's gathering then comes, or this evening's gathering comes at a pivotal moment for our nation. In the aftermath of Hurricane Melissa, Jamaica has been forced to confront once again the harsh truth that climate change is not a distant concept. It is here. And some have tried to deny that, but it is very much here. It is shaping our daily realities, and it is demanding that we change how we think, how we plan, build, and respond. And this is precisely why the VM Group is proud to partner with the University of the West Indies in hosting this platform. Our aim has always been to spark rigorous, meaningful national dialogue that leads to better outcomes for our people. And if ever there was a time for informed, courageous thinking, it is now. This evening we're honored to hear from one of the leading voices on climate science in our region, Professor Michael Taylor, and the entire region can own him. And his keynote address, this post-Melissa climate, why the conversation must change, comes not only at the right time, but with the urgency that this moment demands. I think the topic reflects urgency. Hurricane Melissa was more than a weather system. It was a warning, a demonstration of what science has long predicted. And I've heard Professor Taylor, I think, more than 10 years ago, sharing this information. Question is how many of us have listened. That the Caribbean will face more frequent, more intense, more disruptive climate events. Across Jamaica, we witnessed losses of lives, of livelihood, of infrastructure, of confidence. And we have all been reminded that resilience must be built deliberately, consistently, and with science at the center. So tonight's conversation is extremely important. Climate change, in addition to being an environmental issue, is also an economic, social, and developmental challenge. It affects how we protect vulnerable communities, how we design financial systems, how we build homes, how we farm, how we provide education, how we provide healthcare, how we insure assets, and how we plan for a future that will look very different from our past. So I want to especially commend Professor Taylor and the distinguished panel assembled who will share with us, because your expertise helps us to move from reaction to resilience, from good intentions to actionable strategies. At the VM Group, we believe strongly that collaboration across academia, industry, government, and civil society is the only way we will navigate this climate-altered reality. This lecture series is one of the ways we bring those voices together, and we are deeply committed to the role it plays. So as we settle in for what will be an insightful evening, I ask one thing of all of us: let us listen with the intention to act. Let us leave here ready to contribute, each in our own sphere, to building a Jamaica that is more resilient, more adaptive, and more prepared than the one Hurricane Melissa found on the 28th of October. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining online. Thank you for caring about this issue. And thank you for being a part of the national effort to shape a safer, stronger future for Jamaica and the wider Caribbean. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, there is, no doubt in my mind that based on the scope and the activities of the VM Group, they're in banking, insurance, mortgage for housing, investments. They focus on people. There is no doubt that they would want to be a part of this process, and we really are happy that they're with us. And of course, we extend our arm to all who may be within the hearing of my voice. Madam Audrey? Yeah. Yes, that we're open. We're open for business. We would like for you to partner with us as we move the needle forward. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Taylor is a professor of climate science and currently the dean of the Faculty of Science and Technology at UWI Mona. He is a co-director of the Climate Studies Group, Mona, a research body which explores climate and change for the Caribbean region. The team, which some of them are present here today, and I thank you for giving your support, they have done some outstanding work in that area, and they continue to contribute to the success of this matter, both regionally and internationally. Professor Taylor is well published and cited in his scientific work on the impact of climate change on small islands and, yes, in the Caribbean region. He is the coordinating lead author for the special report on 1.5 degrees of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. More recently, yes, he literally did a chapter in Greta Thunberg's book, The Climate Book. Our distinguished guest is a Silver Musgrave Awardee for Science, 2013. He was bestowed the Vice Chancellor's Award for Excellence in 2013, and again with his group in 2018. An awardee of the Caribbean's most prestigious award, the Anthony N. Saga Award. Thank you so very much. The Caribbean is in good hands. In 2021, he was named amongst the apolitical 100 most influential academics in government globally. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Michael Taylor is a fellow of the Caribbean Academy of Science and also of the World Academy of Science. I am very pleased to bring to you Professor Michael Taylor, our guest speaker.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. You know, as I sat there, I said, when you speak after a major, a professor, and a doctor, and you speak in an academic institution, you realize that in their remarks, everything that you're going to say has been said. But I hope you will bear with me this evening. Let me begin with adopting all the protocols and sincerely thanking those who thought me worthy enough to deliver this lecture. Principal, Deputy Principal, and Mr. Campbell, all the others from the UWI and the VM families, all who somehow felt I was capable of reflecting and drawing meaning on the passage of Hurricane Melissa. I'm deeply humbled by the invitation, very grateful, and I'm going to try my best. At the same time, I want to confess that this cloak of responsibility wears heavily on me. The sobering truth is that even if for some of us in the East, the storm feels as though it has passed, for several of our Western Jamaica brothers and sisters, our fellow countrymen and countrywomen, the The storm continues through damaged homes, destroyed livelihoods, disrupted schooling, deep despair, and daily uncertainty. It must be then that UWI and VM to stage this lecture on this theme at this time when we are all still treading in the turbulent wake of Melissa's passing. The intention is for tonight to be more than an academic exercise. Tonight must be about standing in solidarity with all who have been impacted by the event. In that vein, I've decided to approach this evening's lecture in the following way. There are many post-Melissa conversations taking place right now, largely centered on how we can achieve resilience going forward. Lots of commentary circulating, lots of ideas contending, lots of solutions competing. One useful thing then that this lecture can offer is a simple way for the average person, that's me and you. One thing that we can do is for the average person to sort through the many conversations, is for this lecture to offer the average person a way to sort through the many conversations that are taking place. Sort through for applicability, for relevance, and most important, to determine what is missing. What's not being said? What needs to be on the table now? What have we not heard? To try to do this, I want to make the case that there is a shared context within which, sorry, let me just make sure I can work this. I want to make sure that there's a shared context within which the many post-Melissa conversations happening now can, and I would go further to say must be located. I want to identify that context, and I want to use it to streamline the many ideas that are contending into a few necessary conversation pathways. I think we must be going down these conversation pathways. And then, of course, if I can do that, I'm going to leave it up to you to judge which conversation pathways really need to be pursued now, and which one should not be trafficked, and which one really needs more traffic. I believe going this route offers a way for the academic community, in partnership with a socially conscious private sector institution. That's the way they can use this lecture of this nature at this moment to make a meaningful contribution. So I talk about a shared context. What is this shared context? This is where I'm going to confess that the lens through which I'm speaking to you tonight is that I am a climate scientist. Oh no, I saw that face over there. He's going to talk science. But stay with me. Tonight I'm going to suggest that climate science, and specifically the climate science relevant to small island developing states, has to be the shared context for our post-Melissa conversation on resilience building. To show that, as part of this lecture, I'm going to try to answer this one question. To what extent does Hurricane Melissa fit in with what climate science has been telling us as SIDS for so long? Let me put it another way. What I'm really going to try to say is that if there is in fact a fit between Melissa and climate science of SIDS, then you see all those build back better conversations taking place, they have to bear climate science context in mind. Why not? Well, or otherwise, if they don't, they're going to lose their relevance very quickly, and they may work for the moment, but they're going to fail us badly the next storm around. So, now that you know where I'm going, I only need to make one more diversion before getting into the meat of the lecture, and that is to talk about the conceivability gap. Well, I'm sure on seeing the term, those who know me down there are going to say that's another Taylorism. A term coined by one Michael Taylor when he can find no equivalent term in the literature to describe what he wants to say. Stay with that one person named Michael Taylor. At its simplest, the conceivability gap is our collective inability to fully wrap our minds around or conceive of the devastation actually caused by Melissa. But since I'm a climate scientist, you know I have to offer you a proper scientific definition. And the proper scientific definition is this. The conceivability gap is the distance between the destruction we thought would occur and the devastation we actually experienced. You see, as Caribbean SIDS dwellers, we are no strangers to hurricanes. We talk about them, we forecast them, we issue warnings for them, and we prepare for them. How we prepare? We board up, we stock up, and then we pray up. We put things in place to mitigate against and respond to how bad we anticipate the initial damage will be, based largely on past lived experience or the tone of the Prime Minister's voice in the lead-up. Well, we knew Melissa was going to be powerful. The tone was stoic and grave. We knew Melissa was going to be dangerous. The prayers were many, right? And we knew Melissa was going to hit as a Category 5. I see my Jackie from the Met Service there. The forecast told us. All told, we anticipated bad. And yet I want to suggest that we thought Melissa, what we thought Melissa would do and what it actually did are two profoundly different things. And that distance between what we expected and what we experienced is what I am calling the conceivability gap. Let me quickly add that the conceivability gap has likely existed for many past storms. But for those which only brushed us, the gap, though present, likely went unnoticed because it was small and within what we perceived could happen. For Melissa, however, I am positing that the conceivability gap is not only real, it's huge, and that this is a part of what is deeply troubling our psyche today. How do I know the conceivability gap is real and large? 6 unmistakable signals. 1, we struggle to find the right word to describe what Melissa did. Damage and destruction seems too inadequate. Apocalyptic, dystopian, devastation. Those are the words that are being bandied around right now. 2, the harrowing tales and images of Melissa's aftermath are deeply disturbing, especially as they cut across societal classes and include those we thought surely should have fared better, much better. 3, the overwhelming guilt we feel, especially those of us in Kingston, that we have moved on when there are still communities that are marooned or in darkness long after the winds have passed. 4, the persistence of psychological distress, even for us in the East. 5, the evolution of the official vocabulary. Have you noticed that the technocrats have shifted the narrative from post-Melissa damage to Melissa as a national setback? And 6, the conspiracy theories. Melissa was manufactured is what you say when the lived reality exceeds what you think is physically possible. But why is the conceivability gap an important framing for this lecture? Because if we can ascertain why Melissa's impact so wildly exceeded what we had conceived, then it provides the insight into what the streamlined resilience conversation pathways should look like. That leads me to the central claim of this evening's lecture. I am suggesting that Melissa's large conceivability gap was not accidental, nor did it emerge randomly, nor was it just the product of sheer bad luck. Rather, it is a direct result of deep gaps between what climate science has been saying for years and how fully we have allowed those climate realities to shape our quest to be the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business. That is why the climate science context is important. Here then is the outline for the remainder of my lecture, and don't worry, Major, it won't be too long. It's a simple one. Firstly, I want to outline 4 truths from SIDS climate science. Nothing new. The people I see in this room, you know it all already. But I will also show how Melissa confirmed them. Secondly, I will point to 4 lessons about gaps in how we have organized society, notwithstanding that we know the science truths. These gaps help explain why the Melissa conceivability gap is so wide. In the lecture, I will show how Melissa has exposed those gaps. And then finally, I will use those 4 lessons to suggest 4 necessary resilience conversation pathways that we have to be following now as we attempt to build back better post-Melissa. You know, my alternative title for this talk, had my thoughts coalesced much earlier than they did, would have been the TLC we need after Melissa: truths, lessons, and conversations. But let us turn quickly to the first climate science truth, confirmed by Hurricane Melissa. Truth number 1. The first truth that climate science has been trying to communicate to SIDS is this: we are now living in a climate era where the unprecedented has become inescapable. For a long time, we have treated climate in this way. We think, we have treated the extraordinary event as rare. We speak of the once-in-a-lifetime flood or drought or hot summer. But climate science has really been trying to warn us that this no longer holds true. Reports from the IPCC, of which you heard I was a part, the overarching global science authority on the subject, tell us clearly that human-induced greenhouse gas emissions have led to an increased frequency and or intensity of some weather and climate extremes since pre-industrial times. But even more sobering, they say that the occurrence of extreme events, unprecedented in the observed record, will rise with increasing global warming. And the rarer the event, the faster the increase. Let me put it in simple words. It's the most unprecedented events that are becoming common the fastest. Here in the Caribbean, we already knew this because we have been living it. In 2017, 3 Category 5 hurricanes, Irma, Maria, and Jose, crossed the region in a rapid succession, and we call that unprecedented. Then in 2019, Hurricane Dorian stalled over the Bahamas as Category 5 and rewrote what devastation meant, and we call that unprecedented. In 2020, the Atlantic hurricane season exhausted the alphabet and moved to Greek letters, alpha, beta, gamma, delta. And you know what we call that? Unprecedented. In 2024, Hurricane Beryl became the earliest Category 5 storm ever recorded. And guess what we call that? Unprecedented. You notice the pattern? Every time we defined unprecedented, climate change simply introduced a new spin on it. And now, merely 15 months after Beryl, here comes Melissa, a monster of a storm. For Jamaica, Melissa has become our personal confirmation that the unprecedented has become inescapable. It developed over warm record waters and in atmospheric conditions made several times more likely by climate change. It underwent rapid intensification, in fact, extreme rapid intensification, more than double the formal threshold, becoming a superstorm with winds 7% stronger and rainfall roughly 16% heavier than would have been expected because of climate change. What I'm pointing out is that the scale of Melissa the storm confirmed that the unprecedented is no longer something ahead of us. It is part of our lived reality. In confirming this first scientific truth, you know what Melissa was doing? It was teaching us a critical lesson. And that lesson is that we have an engineering gap. Again, let me use proper science to define it. The engineering gap is the distance between the climate our infrastructure was designed for and the climate it is now required to endure. Melissa exposed this gap in a big way through the breadth of its infrastructural damage. Publicly available data tell this story, and you heard some of it from Major early. Roads, 385 impacted, 195 corridors impassable at peak. Water, 631 of 763 NWC water systems offline. Health, 5 major hospitals and 100 plus health centers damaged, with 47 closed at peak. Education, 616 education institutes from infant through tertiary sustained physical damage. Power and telecom, 77% of the island without power at peak, and internet, and only 35% of cell sites functioning during the worst. That's why your call wouldn't go through. Buildings, over 146,000 suffered major to severe damage, with 120,000 roofs lost. Melissa made one thing unmistakably clear: the engineering gap is not theoretical. During Melissa, what failed was not one isolated structure in one unlucky community. What failed was system after system: roads, water, electricity, water, telecoms, health, education, all at once. The system-wide engineering failure then temporarily disabled most all other operating systems of society. A big part then of the shock we are experiencing, what I have defined as the conceivability gap, is that we could never have conceived that we were so far behind the engineering curve. But Melissa revealed that we are living in an engineered Jamaica whose assumptions are anchored in a climate that is already behind us. We will no doubt debate the reasons for that after. That's why we have a wonderful panel. So we will debate that. But whether that is due to reluctance to retrofit, cost expediency, fading disaster memory, lack of accessible public guidance, or unwillingness to grasp what climate change now really means, whatever the reason, Melissa's lesson is clear. We have this engineering gap and we can no longer ignore it. So what does this mean for the post-Melissa resilience conversation, which is what I'm suggesting I'm talking about? It means that one essential conversation pathway must be the standards pathway. If the climate is changing faster than our building assumptions, then our standards also have to evolve faster than our infrastructural vulnerabilities. Yes, our honorable minister is correct that the enforcement of the Building Act is critical, but Melissa is asking a way deeper question. Has the climate already outpaced some of the assumptions embedded in the Act? Here, for example, are 5 questions we may want to ask if we haven't heard them yet in the standards discussion. 1, in rapidly rebuilding now, what climate standards are being used? Yesterday's, well, the Building Act was passed in 2018. Today's, what Melissa has delivered, or tomorrow's, what climate science is projecting. 2, are climate scientists embedded in the standards conversation? And I haven't yet been invited to the, to the discussion, but there may be others. And will research capacity be strengthened so standards can evolve as the climate evolves? That's my shameless plug for underfunded science and research. 3, do ordinary citizens have clear, simplified, climate-rated rebuilding guidance? They are rebuilding now. 4, are we revisiting, for strengthening, the monitoring and enforcement of standards frameworks? Those parish councils working well? 5, should all large public and private infrastructure projects be required to openly declare the climate standards to which they are or were built? And should we as citizens demand it? Let me summarize. The first SIDS climate science truth, as confirmed by the scale of Melissa, is that the unprecedented has become inescapable. In confirming this, Melissa exposed our engineering gap, a major contributor to the conceivability gap. If we accept that truth, then one of the essential post-Melissa conversations pathways must be about standards. Standards that match the climate of the present while anticipating the climate of the future. The first lesson. 2, let's talk about the second truth. The second truth that SIDS climate science has been trying to communicate is this. We are now living in a climate era where the once untouched are becoming imperiled. Let me quickly explain. For a long time, we have thought about climate change mainly in the language of weather exposure. This means we have conditioned ourselves to believe that climate only affects those who are directly exposed to the elements. So when we speak about those climate impacts, we name weather-sensitive sectors like agriculture, water, and even tourism. And when we speak about who is most vulnerable, we call the usual names: farmers, fishers, hillside dwellers, informal settlers with inadequate housing and water access. Closely connected to this is that when we think about climate loss, we gravitate to weather losses we can convert into dollars. Things like broken infrastructure, disrupted production, reduced earnings, lost crops, closed hotels. And then we build our climate strategies to largely address those monetary losses. But science has been warning us for some time that that is a dangerously incomplete way to think about climate vulnerability. As far back as 2012, the State of the Jamaica Climate, produced by this university, warned that because climate sensitivity pervades Jamaican existence, everyone and everything is affected by climate variability. The IPCC has gone a little further, stating that non-economic losses to health, culture, biodiversity, heritage, identity, community cohesion, and psychological well-being are growing rapidly and must be taken seriously. In other words, climate change is not only impacting what is obviously weather sensitive and what we can easily price, it is now also actively eroding things we never remotely associated with climate change. The previously untouched are becoming imperiled. Melissa has become our personal confirmation of this. How? Through the scope of social and environmental loss it inflicted. The magnitude of Melissa's devastation is not only to be measured in buildings and roads, it's also in the ecosystem function loss across entire landscapes. That's the green of Jamaica before and after Melissa. But also, add to that the concerning extent of education loss, the future cultural memory loss embedded in the historic towns and heritage spaces that can never be visited again, the peace of mind loss, seeing now when even a little breeze blows, you get nervous. And the other quieter human losses, like those arising from cancelled sporting events and leagues, out of work artists, and shuttered community bars. All of those speak to society interrupting. Melissa confirmed that climate loss today is not only structural, it's ecological, educational, cultural, psychological, and communal, all at the same time. In doing so, Melissa taught us a second critical lesson. We not only have an engineering gap, we have a protection gap. Well, you know the drill. I'm going to put on my scientific cap and give you the proper scientific definition. And the proper scientific definition says, the protection gap is the distance between those we are presently designing climate protection for and those the new climate is now demanding also must be protected. This gap exists because our protection systems have been built around a narrow and outdated idea of who and what is vulnerable to climate, leaving many unprotected. Unfortunately, Melissa found this gap, stepped into it with devastating efficiency. For example, Melissa has now revealed it's not just informal settlers that need protection, it's also middle-income and formally planned gated communities that were also destroyed. It's not just daily wage earners who need protection, but also professionals and salaried workers whose incomes disappeared with their workplaces. It's not just farmers and fishermen who need protection, but school children whose education has become a huge calamity. It's not just meteorologists who are under stress during a storm. It's the mental health of our security, utility, and other first responders. It's equally small businesses in devastated towns that need protection, as it is larger suppliers in less impacted cities like Kingston with nowhere to move their goods to now. It's not just coastlines and hillsides that need protection, but fragile ecosystems already under threat from big development. It's not just smart hospitals that we need to ensure the continuity of health, but it's also psychological protection for medical workers who endure enormous pressure during disasters. And it's not just major economic assets that need protecting, but also heritage spaces, cultural institutions, and places of memory that anchor who we are. What I'm saying is this: a big part of the shock we are experiencing, what I have defined as the conceivability gap, is that we never conceived that so many aspects of life related to who we are were unprotected. We have too long underestimated who and what in this new climate era are at risk, and we have failed to protect them. If this is true, then the post-Melissa resilience conversation cannot only be about standards, it also has to be about a second pathway: safeguards. This concerns how we protect not just buildings, but people and the environment in the face of escalating climate change. We can debate later, and I'm sure we will, how to best implement safeguards in just and equitable ways. But for now, the central point is that our mental map of vulnerability is outdated, and Jamaica is still operating with protection assumptions anchored in a climate that is already behind us. We must discuss safeguards. Here then are some questions to ask as we enter the safeguards conversation pathway. Are we still designing protection only for the poorest? Yes, they need it. Or are we also shielding the newly exposed middle? Has our focus remained too heavily on post-disaster relief, with too little attention paid to embedding buffers, especially for social and environmental systems, before the shock? Are we measuring recovery only in buildings repaired, or also in livelihoods protected, income stabilized, and biodiversity restored? Will we see greater investment in mental health systems as core climate infrastructure? And are we treating loss of community life as an unfortunate side effect or as a central climate risk demanding planned protection? Let me summarize. The second SIDS climate science truth, as confirmed by the scope of Melissa's impacts, is that the untouched have become imperiled. In confirming this, Melissa has exposed our protection gap, a major contributor to the conceivability gap. And if we accept that truth, then a second essential post-Melissa conversation pathway has to be about safeguards, societal and environmental protection that can match and resist the climate erosion of the present era. Before you fall asleep, the third truth. The third truth that SIDS climate science has been trying to communicate is this: we are now living in a climate era that makes achieving the utopian more and more improbable. By utopian, I mean our aspiration to achieve developed country status by 2030, underpinned by the Sustainable Development Goals. Like most national development frameworks, our roadmap for doing so is Vision 2030, and it rests on several quiet assumptions: that progress will be largely linear, that shocks will be occasional, that recovery windows will be long enough for momentum to return, and that development will advance in steady enabling steps. But climate science has long been telling us something else. In this climate era, those assumptions no longer hold, and near-term visions of utopia for SIDS will be delayed. The IPCC's special report on 1.5 puts it starkly. climate change affects the ability to achieve sustainable development goals, or a little more starkly, without societal transformation and rapid implementation of ambitious greenhouse gas reduction measures, achieving sustainable development will be exceedingly difficult, if not impossible, to achieve. Here in Jamaica, we don't only know this theory. Our development history tells the same story, and I know I'm treading on waters. I'm a scientist, and I have a principle. Anyway, when we look at the pattern of climate shocks over the past 2 decades, hurricane, flood, drought, storm, and this is just from 2000 to present, does not include Beryl or Melissa. So when we look at it, hurricane, then flood, then drought, storms, extreme heat, what we see is not isolated disruptions, but recurrent developmental setbacks because we don't have time to recover in between. Our 2030 utopian vision is becoming more improbable the closer we get to it. I use the Prime Minister's figures of November 5, which were a little earlier, but he estimated the damage. So Melissa, confirmed this in the most sobering way possible, really through the sheer size of the economic setback it has imposed on our country. So using the Prime Minister's figures of November 5, he estimated the damages then from Hurricane Melissa as US $6 to $7 billion, we hear it's more, and 28 to 32% of GDP. No matter how you wrap your mind around it, even as a scientist, losing nearly a third of national output in a single event is what I would call macroeconomic rupture. I know that's not a proper economics term. And part of that loss may be because the region was hit badly by Beryl and then in 13 months now by Melissa. Well, I think the PIOJ, Ms. Bernard, was adding another spin to the reality. They said recovery to pre-Melissa output levels may take between 3 and 5 years. Well, think about the upper limit. 5 years from now means 2030. And at 2030, we will get back to where we were in September 2025. Vision 2030? And that is assuming generously that no other climate shock intervenes between then. This is where I need to slip in that the next hurricane season is 8 months away. Melissa has therefore taught us a third lesson. And you know what I'm calling that lesson? We have a continuity gap. And here's my proper science definition. The continuity gap is the difference between the time our development systems need to absorb and move forward from the last shock and the time it takes for the next shock to arrive. This is where I want to segue just a bit to talk about this diagram. This diagram is from the JS-RAT, Miss Bernard would know it, and I'm going to say a little bit about it very soon as I approach the wrapping up. Don't worry, Major. JS-RAT is a novel tool that we have, the government has invested in, built by Oxford and our team at university here, called the Jamaica Systemic Risk Assessment Tool. This diagram is taken from a little study we asked to be done just leading up to this lecture. And it is the expected annual damages and expected annual economic losses in Jamaican dollars per day due to coastal flooding of the flood zones in the Kingston and St. Andrew area if a weaker Melissa-like storm were to strike us next year, but come to Kingston instead. All you really want to see, if you can't even read the numbers, is that the numbers have whole heap of zeros. at the end. That's all you really want to see. And I should tell you that the JS-RAT, wonderful tool, the highest category storm the government had envisioned when building it is less than Melissa. The features of that storm. Melissa also provides insight into what impacts the continuity gap. So I'm saying there is this continuity gap. It's not just the shock itself and the timing when it comes. It is also how we organize our development models to facilitate recovery in the in-between times. We know some things now that some things that we do actually help to narrow the gap. For example, access to disaster contingency financing, the ability to mobilize nearly $1 billion in a week after Melissa is a significant and positive pivot in our development model. But Melissa is also showing up factors that keep the gap wide. For example, siloed planning widens the continuity gap. It is clear from the post-Melissa period that planning for climate, sector by sector, ministry by ministry, project by project, challenges our ability to recover in the in-between times. Why? Because that's not how climate works. It cascades. When the energy sector fails, the water sector fails, and then when the water sector fails, the public health fails. When the transport fails and the markets fail, and when the market fails, then food security fails. Or when communication fails, emergency response fails, and when emergency response fails, you get the idea. In a cascading climate system, integrated recovery models are needed. Otherwise, recovery is constrained by whichever sector is furthest behind. Over-centralized government-centric recovery widens the continuity gap. It has also become clear that a model that relies too heavily on central government action slows the agility needed to recover in the in-between times. Over-centralization creates bottlenecks as action must wait on approvals, assessments, procurement cycles, verification, and then sign off. Similarly, recovery premised on a by-government-only model eventually overwhelms the public institutions that are already stretched. That is why it shouldn't surprise us that in the current post-Melissa period, people are already re-roofing with whatever they have available. They simply can't wait for the wheels of government bureaucracy to turn in their direction. Treating communities as beneficiaries rather than co-builders widen the community gap. Using a recovery model that positions communities as recipients rather than partners slows the speed at which recovery can occur. In every disaster, the lived reality is that households and neighbors arrive first. They are the first responders. Community exclusion, therefore, slows recovery at the most critical moment. What I'm saying is this: a big part of the shock we are experiencing, that I defined as the conceivability gap, is that we never conceived our recovery models for the in-between disaster times were this inadequate. As especially illustrated by the West, when Melissa was quickly followed on Beryl. This means that the post-Melissa resilience conversation must also include a third pathway, not just standards, not just safeguards, but what I'm going to call shifted approaches. In simple terms, what modifications are needed to our development models so that the recovery becomes the stabilization phase of continuous growth. All right, you know I'm at the limit now of my development economics knowledge. I'm going to end this point. The shifted approaches I am talking about include moving away from siloed planning to integrated systems design, from centralized response to distributed resilience, and from government-only delivery to whole-of-society responses. These shifts complement disaster contingency financing and help ensure that recovery can keep pace with the climate shock. So here are some questions for the shifted approaches conversation. Has our present sector-by-sector approach to climate proofing created weak points that the next shock, which may not be far away, can easily exploit? As we rebuild, how do we empower parishes and local authorities to function as first stabilizers, not just first reporters? Should decentralization be pursued deliberately as a climate resilience strategy? Let me summarize. The third SIDS climate science truth confirmed by the size of Melissa's economic setback is that the utopian is becoming increasingly improbable. In confirming this, Melissa has exposed that we have a continuity gap, a major contributor to the conceivability gap. If we accept that truth, then a third essential post-Melissa conversation must be about shifted approaches so that our development model can continue functioning in an era of more frequent climate disruptions. Major, you'll be happy to know I'm on the last truth. The fourth and final truth is perhaps the simplest, but the most unsettling of them all. We are now living in a climate era in which the urgent has become immediate. We need action now to ensure a survivable and livable future. Allow me to make a confession. In my more than 2 decades as a climate scientist, I have witnessed a profound transition. I no longer have to struggle as hard to convince people that climate change is real, Mr. Campbell. With every year of hotter temperatures, erratic rainfall, longer droughts, rising seas, and hurricane near misses, climate has made its own case. It has declared itself a national priority without our permission. And not strangely, happily, Jamaica has actually listened. We now have a climate change policy framework, a comprehensive disaster risk management policy and strategy, a long-term climate change strategy, a 2050 emissions reductions and climate resilience strategy. Boy, government documents always have long names, you know. A community-based adaptation program, sector plans under Vision 2030, 5 detailed sectoral vulnerability assessments for housing, health, coastal tourism and water, and 5 accompanying adaptation plans. And we have JSRAT that I told you about earlier, our National Systemic Risk Climate Tool. Together, these and other plans represent Jamaica's official climate toolbox, and they clearly show that as a country, we do recognize the urgency of planning for and responding to climate. So I do have the struggle of trying to convince, but what my new struggle is convincing us that urgency requires more, much more than plans. I struggle with the fact also that our current approach to climate action tends to be either phased in when donor funds arrive, sequenced behind other priorities, postponed because we feel the real big one hasn't hit yet, or approached in spurts through pilots that never scale. In other words, I struggle that we continue to respond to climate incrementally and when convenient. But the science emphatically agrees that the urgency required through plans and projects is no longer enough in the current climate era we are now living in. The IPCC plainly states rapid and far-reaching transitions across all sectors and systems are necessary to secure a livable and securable future for all. Or in plain language, the climate crisis demands structural transformation and it demands it immediately. Melissa confirmed this fourth truth with ruthless clarity. It spotlighted what it means to have risks mapped, strategies written, and tools built, and yet still be overwhelmed when the storm arrives. None of the above restrained the devastation Melissa delivered. Consider this. Long before Melissa formed, the Housing and Coastal Adaptation Plan of 2022 identified Westmoreland as among the parishes most exposed to storm surge and flooding, projecting heights of 2.1 meter in Negril, 2 meter in Savlamar, and 2.6 in Black River. The Health Plan 22 identified Westmoreland and St. Elizabeth among the most exposed to extreme wind risk. The tourism plan named Montego Bay, Negril, and Treasure Beach as highly exposed tourism zone. The water plan, also 2022, flagged Negril and western coastal settlements as vulnerable to saltwater intrusion and flood damage supply systems. And JSRAT, that fantastic tool, identified Black River as one of the 2 most vulnerable places in the country based on combined climate risk. In short, the epicenter of Melissa's damage had already been scientifically identified as extremely vulnerable. Yet vulnerability identification did not translate into vulnerability reduction. In confirming this fourth truth, Melissa taught us one final lesson. One more gap. We have an implementation gap. Here is my my last one, science definition. The implementation gap is the distance between recognizing climate change as a national priority and operationalizing that priority at the scale and speed the risk now demands. More simply, it's a distance between planning and doing. Now, dream with me for a moment. What if mangroves, reefs, and wetlands had been restored as storm surge buffers as our long-term strategy had called for? Would storm surge have penetrated as far inland? What if settlements and infrastructure had been strictly restricted from floodplain and erosion zones as Vision 2030 and the DRM policy prescribe? Would displacement now be as widespread? What if clinics and hospitals had been fully climate resilient with surge capacity and embedded mental health response teams as our health plan called for? Would trauma now be as deep and persistent? And I could go on. What I'm saying is this: a big part of the shock we are experiencing, the conceivability gap I call it, is that we cannot fully conceive how different things might have been if we had acted on what we already knew. This means that the post-Melissa climate resilience conversations must pivot down at least one more pathway. I'm going to call it the speedy actions pathway. That is, moving conceptualized plans to practice immediately and at scales equivalent to the climate challenge. Here are some questions for the speedy actions conversation. Can some of the billions in recovery financing be allocated to moving already approved adaptation and mitigation measures from paper to ground? Will already available tools like JSRAT be used to identify and fast-track climate action in the most vulnerable areas? Will we establish mechanisms for mainstreaming adaptation and mitigation into annual capital budgets, not just project proposals? Will we move away from measuring national progress by press releases documenting strategies to be launched and move towards those documenting risk actually reduced? Let me summarize. The fourth climate science truth, as confirmed by Melissa's spotlight on unenacted plans and slow progress, is that the urgent has become immediate. In confirming this, Melissa has exposed our implementation gap, a major contributor to the conceivability gap. If we accept that truth, then a fourth essential post-Melissa conversation pathway must be around speedy action, so that the next storm meets a Jamaica that has moved past knowing to doing. So I'm at the end, and I know I've gone on too long. But I want to close by returning to where we all still are, to the recognition that Melissa is still a painful national moment. And it is precisely because of that pain that we must refuse to treat it as just another storm to get past. We must instead allow this moment to change how we operate going forward, particularly how we approach resilience building in the context of the new climate era we now inhabit. In essence, what I have offered you this evening is my attempt at a framework for the national resilience conversation now unfolding around us. And that framework really rests on three essential movements. First, we must begin by acknowledging the science as the context to our conversations. Tonight I place before you four climate truths, science truths, that the unprecedented is now inescapable, and that the once untouched are now becoming imperiled, that the utopian is becoming improbable, and that the urgent has become immediate. Melissa did not create those truths, but it certainly did confirm them. Melissa confirmed the first truth through the massive scale of the storm, which translated into massive structural damage. It confirmed the second through the wide scope of social and environmental impact it wrought. It confirmed the third through the sheer size of the national setback. And it confirmed the fourth by spotlighting how our best climate plans remain largely unenacted. If Melissa makes anything undeniable, it is that science and research can no longer be treated as optional accessories to development. They must remain current, continuous, and deeply embedded in how this country plans, builds, finances, and governs. And so let me just say plainly and as diplomatically as I can, one of the hardest things in the Caribbean is to secure consistent support for, including from the private sector, long-term research. Yet, more Melissas are going to come. And if we are to survive what is ahead, our region must remain armed with the best possible knowledge, not imported, but that far from our context, not yesterday's data, and not borrowed assumptions. Secondly, in my framework, we must confront the lessons Melissa has forced upon us. In confirming the four scientific truths, Melissa exposed weaknesses we have to address in our resilience building. These are the starting points. Melissa revealed our engineering gap between climate we are building for and the climate now striking us. Our protection gap between who we used to think was vulnerable and who the climate has now exposed. Our continuity gap between how often shocks now arrive and how slowly our development model recovers. And our implementation gap between what we plan and what we actually get, what gets delivered on the ground. These gaps don't operate in isolation. They are interlocked, they are stacked, and together it is they that have produced the large conceivability gap we are now experiencing. The distance between the destruction we imagined and the devastation we endured. And it brings me to the last final movement in the framework. We must now tackle the gaps head on. If the next storm is strong, and the science says it will be, then our objective as a nation must be to ensure that even if the storm is stronger, the shock afterward will be smaller because the gaps have been reduced. That means elevating the conversation around standards so that what we build now truly matches the climate era we are in, and in so doing shrink the engineering gap. Elevating the conversation around safeguards for society and environment proactively, and in so doing shrinking the protection gap. Elevating the conversation around shifted approaches to development so that growth continues between storms and is not erased after every impact. This will shrink the continuity gap. And finally, elevating the conversation around the speed of execution, moving from intention to delivery and from strategy to ground, thereby shrinking the implementation gap. This is how we begin to collectively close the conceivability gap. Not by hoping that storms weaken, but by ensuring our systems strengthen faster than the risk escalates. And if you forget every graph, every statistic, every technical argument I presented tonight, I ask you to remember just this. In the post-Melissa era, the climate conversation must drive us to act, acknowledge the science, consider the lessons learned, tackle the gaps head on. Climate change is no longer a distant threat to be managed someday. It is now the condition under which all our futures will be built or broken. Thank you. Thank you. I set up here deliberately just for one last thing. The principal mentioned in his opening remarks the Higher Education Task Force. And we really hope that it will work. And one of the ways we think an immediate way for it to contribute is that in this immediate post-Melissa, people need guidance. and they need guidance on a range of things. And the expertise that we have across the university in areas can help. As our contribution to the project, our group is spearheading an initiative to develop 2-page simple language policy guidances. We have developed 11 already. And you can see that they run the gamut from things like how adults and older chronic disease must be dealt with now. They all address what must be done now in the thing. You will see that the range of authors of these gaps right now run the gamut across our university. And we're challenging other researchers to help contribute to these 2-page gaps, policy things, because we have to fill those gaps now. And if you want to find the ones that are already there and some more are coming, we have a temporary page. We know it's going to move to the university's higher education page eventually. But if you want to take a picture of that and just type it in, unfortunately I don't have a QR code right now. It's a temporary location. You can find the 2 pages that we have done already. As a university, we can contribute. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, as Professor Taylor takes his seat, could I ask his family to stand, please? Could I ask his family to stand? Yes, yes, give them a round of applause. Give them a round of applause. Thank you. That's correct. I was just reminded, of course, his family, yes, but his father is also here, right? I'd like to acknowledge his father, right? His aunt. Prof, you need to tell me everybody that's down there. Good. Thank you so very much. They turn out. They turn out. Ladies and gentlemen, no, I'm not going to be here long at all. It's simple. It cannot be business as usual. And we said that at the start. Professor Taylor just gave us just about every other piece of information that we needed to tell us that things have changed. So whether it is the conceivable gap, that engineering gap, the protection gap, the continuity gap, or yes, the implementation gap, something we were talking about in our meeting this afternoon with the chairs and co-chair of the higher education task force. We know something has to be done. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to now put a question to our panelists. Professor Taylor has spoken. Do you agree with him or don't you? I'm going to start. Yeah, man, I put her over the spot, right? I'm going to start with Madam Bernard. Would you like to come up here and give us your take on things, please?
Do you want me to just answer that question or make my presentation?
Make your presentation. Make your presentation, please. Thank you. They don't have a lot of time. They just have a few minutes to talk, right? Let's.
Okay, and so I am also going to accept the protocol as established and say thank you all for inviting the Planning Institute of Jamaica to be here. Prof. Taylor, I actually jotted down a few words that I said I wanted to congratulate you on the insightful presentation and the impassioned call to action. It was not a forceful call, a very subtle call, but impassioned. One of the things I also want to associate with you is to use the opportunity to express solidarity with everyone in Jamaica, but particularly the persons in the West. And I took note of the fact that although Melissa has created this conceivability gap that you spoke about. In a sense, it was not shocking or surprising to those of us who've been listening to you over the years, because you've been predicting the increasing frequency of more intense storms. And you made reference to the state of the Jamaican climate, and the Planning Institute of Jamaica is very proud to say that we've worked with the Climate Studies Group, Mona, to help to create that climate screening toolbox and toolkit that the country needs to have. I won't list all the policies that we have in place. You mentioned quite a few. I want to say, however, that Jamaica does have a robust climate change policy framework. We do not yet have a climate legislation, but we are working towards that. You talked about the need for some change, some pivoting. And I'm going to say that as much as we've been trying to increase the level of risk-informed planning, again, the state of the Jamaican climate, the selection criteria and all of that developed for putting capital projects through the public investment system, we realize that we do have some gaps. You talked about the engineering gap, for example. We're hoping that as we embrace more climate screening in the work we're doing through the use of tools like the systemic risk assessment tool, particularly identified right now for energy, water, and transport infrastructure. And with the work the group at Mona is doing, that we'll be able to move that into other areas in short order, that we'll be able to bridge some of those engineering gaps that you're talking about. Obviously, it's not going to be in the near future because yes, the standards will have to be developed, and there also will have to be the commitment to invest the resources that we need to strengthen the infrastructure the way we want to. You talked about the setback, the economic setback, and the institution that I'm representing today. Yes, we pay a lot of attention to that, but we have recognized that unless you plan with people at the center of planning, the development goals that you want to achieve will not be achieved. We realize that as inconceivable as the impact of Melissa was, it has really resulted in the reversal of important economic and social development gains that the country has made. You talked about the situation with housing. The housing quality index, for example, is now shattered when we go to do assessment in living conditions. You talk about the Vision 2030, the utopian, and we realize that even now we will have to be reformulating the medium-term socioeconomic framework, because although our long-term goal remains the same, the medium-term reality is not going to support that. So what are some of the opportunities that you have laid before us? Clearly, you have outlined this crisis and the need for resilience and sustainability as we try to move forward. And we're taking your point that we're going to need much creativity, we're going to need reimagining, and critically, we're going to need partnership. Partnership not only at a technical level, but partnership with the community, because the rebuilding process has to be a one Jamaica project. So we have to engage at the community level. For us, there's going to be a tremendous challenge as we try to balance the imperatives of safeguarding the hard-won fiscal stability that we've been talking about for some time, with the kinds of investments that we need to rebuild the social infrastructure. You mentioned the 616 schools, so the health facilities, housing, and to invest in all of that, and to complement that with investment in the psychosocial work that needs to be done, because indeed the Jamaican individual is traumatized, most persons nowadays. Do we have all the tools that we need to have to advance the level of climate screening that we need to do? We have some tools, but we are short on technical capacity in some areas, and that needs to be addressed. You talked about standards, and that's something that we recognize that attention needs to be paid to the building codes, the practices, community locations, and again, you mentioned the importance of tools like the Jamaica Systemic Risk Assessment tool, but the point is we have to be able, as academicians and technical persons, to get those who make those kinds of decisions to say, shall we try to relocate a community? And how do we adjust for the new challenges when you try to move out of the coastal zone to the hinterlands, where the slopes are steep and you have another kind of challenge? So we have a number of challenges we have to be addressing. Of course, the question of building environmental respect is critical, is something that all of us can be involved in. And one thing that in the gaps that you spoke about I didn't hear mention of was, or not explicitly, was the issue of digitalization in the economy. When I went to Black River, I saw a lot of paper on the ground, under a tree, drying. And what were those? Some of those were building applications. When we went to some of the schools, we saw, again, paper drying. What were those? Those are school records that people will not be able to have access to for some time. Now, in this inconceivable experience, this new normal that we are experiencing, how do we plan for some of those things? And it's a tremendous challenge to those of us who are in planning. And I see one of my colleagues here, and we're working with her company to start to do some recovery planning work, because we realize that it's a new normal. Building standards have to change, the design standards for roads have to change, the design standards for houses have to change, and so on and so forth. So we have a tremendous amount of work in front of us, but we believe that the opportunity at this time is tremendous to be able to rebuild, to use your word, to recalibrate, to bridge the engineering gap. Do we have the resources to bridge the implementation gap? I'm not sure, particularly because of the setback that you made reference to, and so on. So, they say the Planning Institute of Jamaica is really committed to using the science in our work. We're committed to continue working with the University of the West Indies, University of Technology, Northern Caribbean University, and other universities, because we want to be able to make informed decisions so that the recommendations that we make are data-driven, they're technically based, and hopefully, if they're implemented, I'm not sure about the speed, Prof, but that when we call the private sector to come on board with us, for example, they will, be able to help us to deliver in the kinds of ways we want to. Before I take my leave, I see my time is up, or I see him shuffling his paper, just to say that one of the things that we're doing is to help other agencies to integrate climate screening in their work. And even the Development Bank of Jamaica has revised its public-private partnership policy to incorporate climate screening. So the tools are becoming more widespread, and we're hoping to train more persons to use the JSRAT so we can have better informed decisions. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. And so we can understand, ladies and gentlemen, while the why the PIOJ has a seat on the Higher Education Disaster Resilience Task Force. And we're hoping that we will be able to work with them and achieve some of those goals. Ladies and gentlemen, I now invite Professor Archer, Carol Archer, from the University of Technology, to give us her side of the story. Thank you. I hope nobody pull her out today because she will go on, right?
Yes. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Protocol observed. And Professor Taylor, thank you. Thank you for your words of wisdom. And, you know, I always rate a good presentation by how it moves me. Yes? When you, at the end of the presentation, when you really want to get up and do something, then you know it's a good presentation. And that's what we had this evening. So thank you for that. And so I don't want to repeat. I fully endorse what you have said. I don't want to repeat. But I want to speak in the 5 minutes that I have about the implementation gap. You're absolutely correct. We have had so many. In fact, I think we should put a moratorium on development of another plan, another policy, or another government paper to move the needle and just get to move the action that you're calling for. And I want to speak to implementation because as I sat and I listened, I recall and I see my colleague Eleanor and Ruth here, the National Spatial Plan. Eleanor was part of the team that prepared the National Spatial Plan. The cost of about, what, $30 million, thereabout. We were instructed that it has to be driven by climate data, that we had to prepare for Jamaica, considering climate data, how our settlements would be changed in accordance with Vision 2030. And Eleanor and her team came together and prepared 7 papers. We have not moved on any of those 7 papers. The National Spatial Plan should have then informed the various land use documents, the development orders. And the development orders for Westmoreland, for St. Elizabeth, because the study was done that showed what should happen in Black River, what should happen in Savannah Lamar and those places. They were never implemented. In fact, to tell you the truth, and this is where you're talking about drawing me out, they had a study to do a study of the 7 studies. Yeah? And so we are in the position we are because we have not moved to the level of implementation. So each and every one of us, I'm asking you this evening that we have to take responsibility and stand in the gap to prevent this from happening. And how do we do that in terms of implementation? Well, one, we had a committee and we worked and we got to the point where we have the Building Act. How many persons here have been exposed to the new Building Act, trained, have any knowledge of the Building Act? Nobody. Yeah, oh yes, Julia, I acknowledge you and the work that you and your agency have done over the years. But we can count the number of persons who have been actually trained so that they can go and see the nail on the zinc, or not to have been a nail, but a screw. So we have the act, we have the policy, but the implementation part where we have persons who are so trained. And even as we speak, we still have less than 5% of the population of persons to carry out the inspection, prepared to do so. Yes? That's the implementation gap. So we have to stand individually and demand. I don't believe that our voices are loud enough, and in the various arenas which we operate, that we are demanding enough from the persons who make decisions to move from the policies to take the action for implementation. And it has to be you and I making the demand. And here's another way that we have to make the demand. And especially with the implementation and in the area of land use management and development. I've noticed that over the past 10, 15 years, we have moved to expand our developments, residential, commercial. And I'm very disturbed because from what I have seen and heard, and speaking to my colleagues in the field, everybody now make a money. Everybody now eat a food. So anybody can develop anywhere. Right? And we make, yes, it is good that you can build wealth, Sir Campbell. But it has to be such that we don't have the destruction that Melissa, because of the investment, I would imagine, well, I know Scotia a little better than most, so the due diligence that is usually provided to, fund those types of operation. But they are not necessarily going through the banks, the formal system, but we need to, whether it is through insurance or some other means, where we don't have what happened in Edmund Ridge, where you would have invested 20 million, 30 million, and the proper planning, the proper approval, those responsibility, and say, I will not support that kind of development. Are we going to be so moved by Professor Taylor's presentation that we are now going to demand, when you see a development going up next door to you, are you going to write to the local authorities and demand that they give you the assurance that the approval and the building process is being followed? If we don't do it, who will? And that, ladies and gentlemen, is one of the sure ways that we can address the implementation gap, by us taking the responsibility and demanding of the decision makers, particularly in the areas of land use management. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, clearly she did take her pill. You notice she never gets out, but believe me, she is very passionate about her area of expertise, and she speaks it just straight to the point. I hope you understood what she had to say, and I'm sure that if you have any questions in a little while, you'll be able to shoot them at her. But as I wait for Prof. Campbell to come up, I just want to remind Prof. Weber down there that I'm going to be calling on her in a little while, because you have to tell us about the mangroves. So people in the audience who think you won't be asking any questions voluntarily, I will volunteer you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Major Davis. Good evening, everyone. And as I see so many of my UWI colleagues here, let me start by expressing our heartfelt gratitude on behalf of the Western Jamaica campus for the outpouring of love and support that we have seen in the immediate aftermath of the hurricane. In the first 2 weeks after Melissa, almost every single day we had either supplies or colleagues from the University of the West Indies Mona campus coming down to either check on us, just to see how we're doing, or to provide some relief support. So we have a caring university, and I'm very proud of that, principal. At no point in time, and I know you and I, we are not Liverpool fans, did we ever feel like we were walking alone, Jason? We had the full support of the campus. So thank you very much, colleagues. What a masterclass of a presentation we have just witnessed. Prof, I hover around your circle, and I say hover because, Prof, they are hardcore scientists. Yeah, I'm more of a human social geographer. And so I spend a lot of time talking to people and trying to figure out what the challenges are and how they come together as communities to respond to some of the changes that they're seeing. But, I think what stuck with me from your presentation, Prof, obviously the implementation gap, because in reflecting on the topic itself, I went way back to Hurricane Gilbert because I wanted to see what the conversation was around Hurricane Gilbert and then what the conversation was after Hurricane Ivan. So after Hurricane Gilbert, we recognized that, one, the quick dispersing of finance, it worked well for macroeconomic stability and infrastructure. Housing and social protection instruments were the weak link after Gilbert. Institutional coordination was inadequate. Urgent need for pre-disaster data and registries was highlighted. Pre-1988 building practices and mitigation strategies were inadequate. The primary housing aid instrument, the building stamp program, was conceptually innovative, but in practice suffered from inadequate distribution, limited technical support, weak enforcement of building standards, and political influence on beneficiary selection, 1988. After Ivan, some of the same issues, but superimposed on those, updating and enforcing building codes, prioritizing maintenance and climate proofing of key infrastructure, integrating hazard information into development approvals. And Prof, you put it as, a shameless plea for the funding of science. And I'm going to join you in that plea, because one of the biggest gaps we have right now is the science policy gap. It is not that we lack ideas. It is not that we lack policies. You saw the climate toolbox that was presented. They're there. But there's a big gap in terms of influencing policy. And we move from conversation to action only when the right people are around the table. You cannot influence the conversation when you're not at the table. How can we have a giant of a climate scientist like Prof. Taylor and there's no seat at the table for him? That is, to me, at the kernel of the problem we face. How do we bridge this science policy interface? And until we do that, we will be 2030, Prof. Taylor, singing the same songs we sang after Hurricane Gilbert. Now, I want to add another gap. Sorry, Prof. I mean, maybe one day you will help me to come up with a proper definition for it. Right. But for simplicity, I will call it the financial gap, because I think that is very important. Because from all the conversations we are hearing coming out of the response and the recovery, and certainly what is happening in terms of the global financial architecture. And I was at COP a few weeks ago, and I was singing, Prof. I walk with the number 558, that we've had 5 Category 5 hurricanes in the last 8 years. Colleagues, the writing was on the wall. Hurricane Maria caused Jamaica over 200% of its GDP. Barbuda, for the first time in 300 years, the island was uninhabited. Yeah? Now, the point I'm making here is that we have the evidence, we have seen the impacts. The challenge is, how do we integrate those lessons into our own planning and scenario modeling for the future? And I think that is what is missing from the conversation, that if we try to go alone, if we try to do it Jamaica style, we will not achieve the types of transformations that we are looking for, certainly at the scale and pace that they are needed. And so, as a country, we must embrace the Bridgetown Initiative, which is calling for a complete restructuring of the global financial architecture. At the core of this is the need to ensure that we have adequate financing that is flowing in a predictable way to countries that are impacted. And I know this is a touchy topic for many, and certainly there are people in the room. I see my colleagues from the Department of Economics. But I do believe that it's time that we pull in the people with the finance expertise and also give them a seat at the table. For a long time, we as domain expertise in climate or geography, we have been telling you how things are changing and the impacts. But now we have reached the business end. We have reached the business end of the problem that we face. And we need the finance people. We need the people who have an understanding of insurance. We talk about the protection gap. Prof. Jamaica is a model for its protection system, in that we have a layer of protection at every level in the society, from the catastrophe bond down to livelihood protection systems. And yet, we have so many weak points. And yet, the high-risk corridors are not protected. And I've not even started to speak about the ecological toll. My mind hasn't gotten there as yet because of the scale of the societal harm that we are going through. But I can't imagine, you know, there's an article that came out in the New York Times, right? And we found that there were trapped birds in the eye of Melissa, right? And when that was investigated, these birds were coming from all over. But that reminded me of the sort of biodiversity impact, the toll it will have on our ecosystems and the ecosystem services they provide. Why does that matter? The poorest of the poor and the most vulnerable in our country are most dependent on these ecosystem services for survival. So that's the linchpin, yeah? And so, Prof, I just want to give you your flowers. And, the other day we had a ceremony for our technical and service staff at the Western Jamaica campus. And Prof. Taylor took the time to record a video sending love and support and solidarity to the WJC community. And so we see you, Prof., not just as a solid academic, but a solid example of how we can lead with compassion. And so thank you. And I was under your leadership as head of the Department of Geography and Geology, so I witnessed more of that. So thank you for all that you're doing for our university and for everything that you're doing for science.
Thank you so very much, Prof. Campbell. Thank you so very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we're at that time now when you get the opportunity to shoot any questions that you want at the panel here. Who have my microphones around there? I don't think we need a microphone in the audience. Do we have one over there? Okay, good. Anybody with a question for the guest speaker or any member of the panel before I go to Prof. Weber? Anybody with a question? Sounds like it was, oh yes, somebody right there. Thank you.
So good night everybody. So the question I have is being directed to Professor Taylor. So the presentation, it highlighted the significant scientific, environmental, economic and social impacts of Hurricane Melissa, as well as continuity gaps in disaster response. Now, how should the government restructure its fiscal planning in the upcoming year to embed disaster response as a core function, but also what are the bureaucratic barriers which are likely to impede these reforms, and how can they be addressed to ensure effective implementation?
Well, the first thing I'm going to say is I'm a climate scientist. So I'm not even going to try to go down that route. You have enough expertise in the room. What I will point you to is that I asked some questions, especially about the development model in between times, and I think the questions I'm asking should prompt some answers. But there are persons in this room far better able to answer that. I am a climate scientist.
So I'd like to.
Wants to.
Sorry.
Okay. So,
I think it's on. Okay.
John, thank you. So,
Turn it on.
so it's on. So you're asking a very difficult question right now, and that's one of the reasons I said that we are at a point now where we have to contemplate how we walk between the raindrops. It's a bad way of saying it, but the country wants to maintain fiscal stability, and that brings all kinds of benefits. But the truth of the matter is that the 8.8 billion that you heard from the grade assessment, we anticipate that is going to get much larger, because that was only for buildings and physical infrastructure. So the losses, some of the losses that Prof. Taylor talked about, you didn't hear mention of those. Question is, it is likely that our debt burden is going to increase, because it is likely, and already you must have heard about the facility through the IMF and so on. We're going to have to borrow resources. What I want to remind you of, though, is that there has been an effort to embed sustainability in the fiscal framework, and that is why Prof. Campbell talked about the layered protection system, which goes from the risk retention level, where we have the National Disaster Fund and the National Natural Disaster Risk Fund, up to the point where we have catastrophe bonds. So the government has that in place. I think it's also part of the fiscal rule to ensure that we are investing in the sustainability issue. However, one of the things is, if the level of damage goes beyond 1.5%, then the government is allowed some latitude to relax the rules. The long and short of the story is, my expectation is that as the Ministry of Finance sorts those things out, you're going to find that we are borrowing a little bit more, and our debt burden, better GDP ratio, is going to increase. One of the things we also do, Prof., and we need to do better at, is that in the PIOJ, for example, they use the can't remember the name of T21 model, and they actually shock it for usually a category 3 event. We know we'll have to realize that Cat 5 events are more frequent, and we will have to make those kinds of adjustments. So we hope to be able to give you better information later, but at the moment we are still in relief and all of those stages.
I do want to just add.
Are we heading for a recession coming soon?
I couldn't say that. No, well, what I can tell you that the economists in my organization have said is that we are anticipating a decline in growth in the next period, and that for the fiscal year 25-26, which ends in March, the economy is likely to decline by between 3 and 5%. No, that's not. No, I can't recall hearing that. I'm sorry. That's not my brief to say that we're headed to a recession.
Ms. Bernard, let me just add to what it's not my field at all, but one of the things I really want to make us, capture, is that all that you talk about there are the losses we have modalities to quantify. And what we really have a gap in is these non-economic losses. Part of that gap is because we have not even paid attention to the research needed to find the ways to capture those. I gave you a list of things that happened from 2000 coming down to 2020. I've had this conversation with Ms. Bernard. In 2024, we had the most extreme summer in terms of heat. And we do not have ways yet to capture what the losses do or the impact of heat. And I'm trying to encourage our colleagues from economics and to work. We have to find contextual ways to capture the non-economic losses. If we don't, then they are not being met. And the 8 billion that we have now that we are getting is not going to budge the needle on those things, And so for me, that's one of the things that I want us to take away. Comes back again that we need the investment in science and research, in our universities to be able to do that. We can't borrow models from elsewhere.
Okay. Another question around the back. Oh, over here. And who has the mic? We have 3. One moment. Then start there and then over here.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Prof. Taylor, It was my wife who saw you presenting, and while it was being streamed, so I jumped on my bicycle and came here quickly. So this device I had created years ago, and the United Nations actually used it to launch the SDGs in Rudolph Elder Park when they could not rely on Digicel and Flow. It's a portable intranet station. So my question is to PIOJ. Since there are 616 schools that you would have seen paper being on the ground and data, could we implement 1,000 of these to help with businesses recover with know your customer, collection, information, etc.? If the answer is yes, I'd love to give you a business card right after the presentation. The second question that I have, and I'm framing the questions as if, because I'm a practicing computer scientist. It's directly to a VM group specifically. Now, I am a beneficiary of being inheriting intergenerational property, right? And one of the challenges you have for those of us who are part of the, vulnerable middle class, which is what Hurricane Melissa is pointing out now. I, for example, would have had to go and buy a power saw, which I told Prof. Taylor, I now have a power saw to help the community, right? But what it also means for myself and many of you who will have children that you leave estate to as well is that if you don't have all your estate handed over in terms of the paperwork, then what happens is that you have a gap in terms of having all of this intergenerational wealth in terms of the asset and not having the banking system have even any instrument at all that can help you if you have, what do you call that? A grant of administration, right? Now, I'm raising that specifically in this post-Melissa conversation because as I had said to one of your consultants, Daryl Strawn from Strawn Tech that works with VM Group, just around me is at least $250 million worth of assets, just my immediate neighbors and myself. And we have so much money locked in, but we can't even turn to the banking institutions based on how we are structured. And that is one community of persons who could then turn around and help enable whatever else they need to do and then have the domino effect, as was said in the presentation. It is the community members who first respond. So I'm asking one question in terms of revenue generation capacity, if the PIOJ can help us to help the community. And I'm asking another question in terms of from the VM side of things, if you can look into creating a new revenue stream or tool or loan product that help persons who actually have intergenerational wealth, but they are restricted. For example, the NHT, once NHT does any kind of property title search and recognizes that your name is on any asset, you no longer qualify for the what would have been $11 million that they could avail. If you're not, you only at max qualify for $5 million. So I just putting it to you that it is a real need, but there's a lot of billions of dollars that you guys could unlock in terms of pioneering work. And I know a lot about pioneering work as evidence here. Thanks again, Prof. Taylor.
Thank you for your comments. And online, I know somebody online just wrote in to ask about, why are we not also having this discourse about earthquakes? But you see, we're talking about some general frameworks here. And if we get those frameworks right, believe me, they will fit all hazards. They will fit all hazards. Just like today, we talk a lot about Melissa. One person there, and then Ms. Togwell Henry over here, please. Yes.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Mine is shaped more as a comment than a question. It has to do with discussions about whether engineering gap or whatever, but more in terms of community partnership. Prof. Taylor mentioned the importance of that, and I think it cuts across all the areas, whether the financial or economic, social, engineering. I have a property in Hanover that was damaged, but it was an interesting lesson in terms of how we communicate and partner with communities in terms of historical knowledge and how we use that in terms of setting some of our standards. Sorry to take up your time, but I recall doing rehabilitating a property, renovating a property, and an elderly person came and asked me what I plan to do. And I told him how I plan to make this fancy roof. And he suggested that I should put the roof back just as how it was. The building is probably just under 90 years old or so. And he said I should put back the zinc just as it was, because he recalled several disaster incidents, and there were cases where that was the only building in that area that still maintained the roof. And I agreed with him and did just that. And the property was totally demolished except for that one building, which is a stone building, and it did not lose all its roof. Everything else went. And that is just an illustration. I'm a community development specialist as well. This is an illustration as to how the engineers, the social scientists, and everybody else, and the need when we talk about partnering with communities, that community members are experts. They have the history, and they can indicate. I went to school in Montego Bay, so I know about Barnett River. And I see what happened in terms of reclamation by the sea of most of the land. And we're discovering that rivers were under the roads. And I could go on and on. So the importance of even talking about community partnership is not only in terms of I can help my brother, but to see the community members as important resource in our planning, development, and in our implementation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so very much for sharing. Thank you for sharing. And that is one of the items, that was mentioned earlier. That matter about implementation. Those plans exist. Those community development plans exist, and the community resilience plans exist, but we just haven't moved the needle at all. Over here, please.
Thank you very much.
The bursar is not here, though, Principal.
I've been getting a lot of hits this evening. So first of all, Professor Taylor, brilliant presentation. Not just insightful, but very forward-thinking, and I agree with Professor Archer. It certainly gave you that call for action. So I, too, want to give you your flowers, and I hope that when you sit at the table for the planning for going forward, that you will share that framework. It was very simply presented, but hugely profound. The only thing that I think the government would need to add to it is the action column to deal with the questions you raised in the conversation. I have a question for Ms. Bernard. Has the PIOJ started to model the impact of Melissa on our 2030 plans? And if so, when would we expect to start to get some reports on that? Thank you.
Okay, so we have not yet started the modeling. What we're doing now is the post-disaster impact assessment, and we, Prof. Taylor, we are trying to use the JSRAT in that process as well. And the expectation is that once we get, so we're getting assistance from UNECLAC, IDB, and a few other agencies to do the post-disaster impact assessment. Once we get all of that, then some of that modeling can be done. We have, however, recognized that while we are maintaining the aspirational elements of Vision 2030 in terms of Jamaica being the place of choice and all of those higher level goals, that it is likely that the medium-term framework as is, there will have to be changes, because remember, the medium-term framework is what guides the budget. And naturally, there is going to be a lot of spend for reconstruction and all of those things. So some of the previously identified priorities will have to take, second place or a minor place. But the expectation is that we will. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, one final question, please. Just one final question. Thank you. One final question. Thank you.
Mine is quick and simple. When there is a clear distinction between act of God and act of man, where does the conversation about compensation start and who should start it?
All right, I'm going to pause. I'm going to take a deep breath right here, right now, because the persons I would like to ask, they're not up here. They're in the audience, right? But Ms. Bernard, is that your side? No. Okay, it's not your side. And nobody from the insurance side of the house wants to speak to it either, right? Maurice, I'm going to apologize, but we do not have that answer right now. And we hope that is something that we can look at. And as we move with this committee that we have, the task force that we have, those are some of the things that we could take a look at. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I said at the start that we were coming here today to experience something like none other. And I am sure that I was not wrong. If you heard nothing else, I am sure you heard about the gaps. And while the gaps may have sounded a little bit, interesting, they're not new. I think we knew about them all along. Right? We've known about the gaps. We might just call them something else. But we believe that at this stage, there must be a call to action. We cannot continue like this. We cannot have the bridge wash out and put back the bridge the same place the very next month. It cannot be right. Something is wrong with that concept. We have the information, we have the plans, we have not implemented them. Many of the plans supported by international organizations for us to write. We write them and then we don't move. And we're hoping that this is not just a wake-up call, but certainly a call to action, and we will act accordingly. Ladies and gentlemen, just before we go into thanking you, may I invite, is it Ava who's coming up, please? Good. Come, please. Come, Ava, come, please. Come. Do your thing. Go. You can go to the front there and do your thing. Go ahead with her, please. It's some tokens, ladies and gentlemen, for our panelists and also our guest speaker. Please, let them feel. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Alvin. Okay, so I think all that's left for me to do, ladies and gentlemen, is on behalf of the UWI Mona and the VM Group, wish to express my profound gratitude for your presence here this evening. Our panelists who gave us the support, the Office of the Deputy Principal who pulled all of this together, the campus events planning team, our security personnel, the library that gave this space to us, and of course, ladies and gentlemen, to you, the attentive audience and participatory audience. But may I also, before I move from here, just express my gratitude to our guest speaker, the man of the moment. Thank you. Thank you so very much for being here. And ladies and gentlemen, same place, same time, next year. Thank you.
No.
Thank you, John. Jonathan, thank you.
How would you like a brand new home by 2027? You and VMBS can make it happen with iSave. Every $25,000 you save with iSave earns an entry to win cash or a new home of your own, all while seeing your balance grow and grow. The more you save, the more entries you get, and every entry has a chance to win a brand new home of your own. Keep saving monthly. Every deposit brings you closer to the grand prize home. VM iSave is the key to winning. How would you like a brand new home by 2027? You and VMBS can make it happen with iSave. Every $25,000 you save with iSave earns an entry to win cash or a new home of your own, all while seeing your balance grow and grow. The more you save, the more entries you get, and every entry has a chance to win a brand new home of your own. Keep saving monthly. Every deposit brings you closer to the grand prize home. VM iSave is the key to winning.